from the commissioner of DHCR. If he had the responsibility only for administering housing policy as opposed to administering rent regulations, which is a job in and of itself. So I would agree with your question that probably should be split off.
The Commissioner said in a recent interview that rent regulation is here to stay, and the sooner that people realize it, the better. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yes, I think that until such time as the market is able to accommodate the housing needs of the people of New York City, we're going to have rent regulation. I would like, in a utopian world, to see the marketplace take over and supply and demand be the rule of the day, but that's not going to happen, especially when we have a real serious homeless problem, as we can all see every day walking out on the street.
We not only have a homeless problem, we have a problem that we simply do not have enough housing for anybody except well-to-do people.
Correct.
We have housing, we do not have enough housing for middle income. How can this be remedied?
Well, I think the answer, like most elected representatives will tell you, lies in the federal government. We've had, unfortunately, in my opinion, an administration that has curtailed federal housing programs throughout the several states. And until we have a new administration that breathes life into a housing program that's going to assist low, moderate, and even higher income people in getting new housing, it's not going to happen. It's just too expensive for the city or the state to do it on their own. It has to be done at a federal level.
But if it's not done on a federal level, then what's going to happen? I mean, if we have another, if our federal policies remain as they have for the past 8 years, if we have another 4 or 8 years of that, then what will the answer be for New York City?
Well, I don't know what the answer will be, but I'm sure that if the policy continues, we're going to see even more homeless. In the past 8 years, we've seen the homeless population grow, and a lot of people like to ascribe the reason for that as being mental illness, drug addiction, or alcoholism. But in my opinion, the answer really lies in the lack of affordable housing. And until we can improve that situation, we're going to have the problem of homelessness is going to continue.
Terry?
Assemblyman, you mentioned that drugs was a very important issue in your district, as it is everywhere. But really, what can Albany do to remedy that problem?
Well, I think we can do and have done a great deal in passing legislation that's important to curtail and provide deterrence.
Such as?
One of the things that we did this year was pass a bill which makes the possession of crack, 500 milligrams or more of crack, a felony. Prior to that time, it was treated as a misdemeanor, and a guy could carry around a basket full of vials of crack and only be convicted of a misdemeanor because the weight of the substance was only misdemeanor weight. Now, under this new bill, we can at least address the problem of the weight of the drug and convict people who possess crack, which is one of the most dangerous substances, of a felony. And that sends a clear message, I believe, to the community. That
Did you vote in favor of that particular bill?
Absolutely. And as a matter of fact, I was the author of another bill that I like to brag about, and that's the school grounds drug law, which the governor signed with a great deal of fanfare a couple of years ago, that provides double penalties for the possession of drugs in and around a school or within 1,000 feet of a school. There have been some problems with that bill, but I think it also sends a clear message that we're not going to tolerate the business of selling drugs in and around a school building.
Mm-hmm. We want to try to move on from drugs and housing and homelessness. There's so much more.
I'd like to go back to I know that drugs, housing, but it's crime is a big problem in your district. How can the state affect crime in the district?
Well,
what
the
can they
state
do?
already is affecting crime by establishing, when I started, I talked about neighborhood organizations, and I've been able to provide a great deal of money for neighborhood watch organizations, not vigilantes, but watch organizations who work along with the police department as their eyes and ears so that they look out for their own community. And if you have in place, like there are in Williamsburg and some parts of Greenpoint and some parts of Fort Greene, an effective organization funded by the State of New York Criminal Justice Services. These organizations, and they work, they can really provide an effective deterrent to crime on the streets, to burglary, robberies, muggings that occur every day.
Assemblyman, do you support the legislation to have a special school buildings authority to build school buildings in New York City?
Better be a yes or no answers. We have about 2 seconds left. Go ahead.
I haven't really thought that one through yet. I'd like a little more time to study the proposal before I make up my mind.
Well, we're out of time. Thanks to our candidate, Assemblyman Joseph Lenthal. I'm Marty Goldenson, and NYC Votes 1988. We'll be right back. For a free booklet, Voter Bill of Rights, send a stamped, self-addressed envelope to the League of Women Voters, 817 Broadway, New York, 10003, or call the League at 212-674-8484.
From institutional investors doing a story on that called me today looking for contacts, so it's funny that you should mention that.
By the way, that suit will fall much better if you unbutton it there.
No,
It's
good.
quite crinkled up and strained looking. That's right. It'll just fall much more. Tends to buckle in. I've always thought they should design a whole line of outfits that stop at the waist. Welcome back to NYC Votes 1988. I'm Marty Goldenson. On this segment, we'll meet a candidate for the 82nd Assembly District in the Bronx. This area covers Williamsbridge, Wakefield, Baychester, and Edenwald. This is Assemblyman Larry Seabrook, the Democratic and liberal incumbent. Declining to join us are his opponents, Dorothy Robinson and Lorraine Vierhoff. Questioning our candidate, Janet Golovner, a representative from the League of Women Voters, and Terry Galway of the Empire State Report. Terry Galway, your question, please.
Assemblyman, drugs have become an important issue in your district and throughout the state. I was wondering on your thoughts on whether you feel the state is losing the war against drugs, if in fact it has no coordinated policy and is really just sort of reacting to circumstances.
Well, I would say that the state is basically reacting to circumstances and have not really gotten into the real fight to solve that problem, just as the federal government has not. I think that we need to develop a comprehensive and coordinated plan as to how we're going to deal with this crack epidemic and addiction within the city of New York and throughout this state.
Should drugs be legalized?
I would be the first to say that drugs should not be legalized because we're giving up to a fight that we never actually got involved in. And I think that it is too soon and too early to say that we should legalize something. We have not developed a sense of how we would regulate it, and who would. We still have not dealt with those individuals who might still be committing crimes in terms of getting legalized drugs.
Is there the possibility that if drugs were legalized that it might decrease the crime rate?
I think with the legalization of drugs, one thing we're certain that it would certainly increase the amount of people that would be addicted, and it will also increase the desire for people to have drugs, and they will basically do what they're doing now, stealing and robbing to get monies to purchase drugs.
It's an interesting theory, and one that some places have started, done some studies on. My next question is, who should take the lead in controlling drugs, and do you think a drug czar should be appointed on the national level?
Well, I think that there's certainly a need for a coordinated effort, and be it a drug czar or what have you, on the federal level to deal with those problems. If we look in terms of cocaine, is basically a foreign substance that is comes into the borders of this country, and it's basically an international dilemma that we have to deal with that's infringing on our borders. And so therefore it is the federal government's responsibility to deal with that problem that's crossing our borders.
Assemblyman Julio Martinez has been pretty much the state drug czar for some time now, and you have said we have no comprehensive policy. Should he be removed?
No, I think that Julio Martinez has done an outstanding job considering the resources that's available to him, and also that we have to look and see that the state of New York, with its limited resources, give a small percentage of the amount of money and the largest percentage of drug addicts that come from the city of New York, where the city of New York in itself has not given anything to addiction services, and the federal government have no federal addicting program to deal with any drug addicts.
If I could move to an issue that's very closely related to drugs in many cases, and that's education. There's been a theory that Albany has not been sensitive to the needs of schools such as those in your district. Do you agree with that, and what can you do to make, if so, what can you do to make Albany more sensitive to the needs of New York City schools?
Well, I think that there's a need in terms of looking and seeing how best can the dollars that are sent to the New York City Board of Education be best utilized throughout the city of New York. And one is that we're looking at the construction of schools within the various districts has been a disaster. When people can make statements such as to say that some state prisons are in better conditions than some of the schools that we send our children to, there's something wrong with that educational system and the state education department and the Board of Regents, who have a responsibility to be that board that looks over the board in the city of New York. And I think that there's a responsibility that we have instilled within the Board of Regents to say that there's a responsibility that you have to monitor and to make sure through the state ed department that the city of New York is more responsive to the children.
Do you support that legislation in the legislature that would create a special authority to build schools in New York City?
I do. I support that, because I think that if we are looking now to see that how many years it takes to build a school in New York City,
10 years, they say.
It would be disaster, and most kids would basically would have graduated from school if they were in the 3rd or 4th grade without having a school built. And I think that we need to go beyond that.
What about the whole subject of decentralization? Do you think our community school boards are doing the job they were set up to do?
I think that there's a problem with decentralization, that decentralization certainly have to be looked at. I think that its purpose and its intent was good, but basically if we look and see that it has not followed the mandate in which it was structured. We have an outdated system. There have not been the redrawing of school board lines, and it has been redistricting in populations and it have taken place after the census for our assembly districts and our city council districts, but never the school board. We have an old and archaic way for decentralization in terms of school board voting, where we're the only areas in New York City that use paper ballots. And we need to bring ourselves into the 20th century. All of that has to be looked at, and I think that decentralization can work with a lot of reform.
Assemblyman, we have a new housing commissioner, Richard Higgins. If he were sitting here, what would you tell him about the housing problems in your district, and how would he go about solving them?
Well, I would tell Mr. Higgins that the state of New York should have a mission, and that mission is to rebuild the Bronx. And in its mission to rebuild the Bronx, that the South Bronx along Bruckner Boulevard going all the way up almost to the New England Thruway up to the borders are basically just bombed out buildings that can be rehabilitated. If you decide to go into Major Deegan, if you come up from 145th Street and go clear across almost to Riverdale, you'll see abandonment with placards up there as if there were windows and flowers. He has a mission, and that mission and responsibility is with the city of New York to say that, hey, we need housing. The people need housing. So therefore, let's go out and do it. And I think that it's incumbent upon us to say that that's a need that we have to deal with.
What about Mitchell-Lama conversion? The Assembly has okayed the one-year moratorium, but eventually, how is that going to be solved?
Well, I think that we have to look at the Mitchell-Lama tenants and say to ourselves that if we truly believe that that's the only middle-class housing system and program that really works, why eliminate a program that works? And I think that it should be taken upon the Senate responsibility to see that that legislation is passed and do something for the Mitchell-Lama tenants, because it works.
I suppose the landlords would argue the reason that it doesn't work is because the state said you can have these buildings after 20 years.
Well, I think that the